Most of you, you may not need to use Audition or some kind of voice software or audio software. If you're going to use sound effects and stuff like that, it behooves you to use something to actually make that happen. Oops, that's backwards. So the proper name is a DAW, a D-A-W, okay, which is a digital audio workstation. And there's ones that cost money, like Audition, and there's ones you just kind of get free. And of course, they don't have a GarageBand for Windows, at least not that I'm aware of, even though they have an iTunes for Windows. In any case, and I keep trying to use the iMac, which I'm going to shut off. Go away. There we go. All right. Now it won't get in my way anymore. Okay, so I'm going to start with Audition. All right, that's the little AU, okay? If you're on one of the iMacs in here, you may not have that little AU, so you're probably going to have to go into the hard drive, into the applications folder and find it, because we don't use it that much. But you'll find it right early on because the Adobe software is generally listed first. On your own applications, yeah, you can find it the best way you can. All right, and I carry all three normally. This is Audacity, this little headphone thing. That's free, and it's kind of like Firefox. It's open freeware, and it has a different, we'll talk about the strengths and weaknesses of each, okay? Then we have GarageBand and Audition. So I'm going to go ahead and launch Audition. Okay, so since we're going to be diving into these, I thought I would bring you the stuff that I normally use. Okay, so for voiceovers and normal stuff like that, I use this little guy. Well, he's not very little, okay. But this one happens to be a Rode. It's not super high end, but it's not low end either. I love how they put a little mark on here so you know where the front of it is. And since I usually use it as a with my computer hooked up, okay, so it has a normal 3-way connector, all right, I have to use this USB adapter, which is actually by Shure, okay, because USB doesn't necessarily provide phantom power to these things, which of course a condenser mic needs phantom power. So there's a phantom power button on here that I can actually activate. What's also really nice about these is that there's a headphone jack, so I can actually put on a set of headphones and hear how I sound in the microphone. Not how the computer, but how I actually sound on the microphone, which is kind of nice. And it has a separate volume control for the monitor. What gain, meaning how powerful you want it, and how loud you want it. Okay, so that's normal stuff that I use. I also use these little guys, which are the Rode lavalier mics. They're a little higher end than normal lavalier mics, but it's kind of nice because it allows multiple channels to be fed at one time, and they feed this little guy who's plugged into my my computer. Okay. So, a DAW, digital audio workstation. Okay, right now we should be in waveform view, okay? And as soon as you click on waveform view, it will automatically assume that you want to create a new audio file, okay? And so this should pop open automatically as soon as you click on that if you don't already have a sound file sitting in there. If you have set up Audition for a separate mic, it will generally panic and say, oh, that microphone's not hooked up. I don't know what to do. Help. But we'll talk about how to adjust settings and stuff, so not to worry. On the Mac, it's generally controlled up here. In sound, this is how we determine where the computer's sourcing. And you can see there's an awful lot of audio because this is in and out. That's why there's so many on mine, is that there is in and out. And it's also on the network. That's why things like security are also in there. If I want, again, anyway, there's a lot of Apple TVs available. Okay? And on the Mac, you go to your sound settings, and it kind of looks like this. And you can see what the current source is for your input. USB has made it really, really nice, especially USB-C, because USB-C can actually provide enough power for phantom power, which is kind of nice. Oh, where was I going with that? I don't know where I was going with that. But this is the nice setting. Yeah, oh, you can have a ton of different microphones all hooked up at the same time. That's what I was going to say. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. I'm just going to call it test, okay? The sample rate, mine is set at 5,800 if you want to see the options for the hertz or sample rate. If you watched the video when I was talking about social media and setting up a social media feed, 4,800 is a normal sample rate in hertz. We're operating in stereo right now, but you don't have to be in stereo. A lot of podcasts and stuff will actually be in mono because they'll be mixed later. And you're feeding mono from separate microphones, so it's not technically stereo. And then there's a 5-in-1. I've never used 5-in-1. I've never had the occasion to need surround sound. Okay, so I'm going to leave it on stereo, and I'm going to leave it at a 32-bit. Most microphones really can only do 24-bit. It's not a big deal for what you folks are probably going to be using, but if we were making serious drama movies, we would want to be at the highest rate, which is 32, because that gives you the most to work with as far as profiles, kind of like having the most frames per second to work with and having raw images instead of JPEGs. It just is a lot more information that you can work with when you're trying to do your final mixing or whatever. Okay, so just tell it okay. Now, yours may not necessarily look like mine, but that's okay. It's all a matter of deciding where your workspace is. You can see how big my screen normally is by the size of the Audition. Since it's on this overhead, it's actually got a lot more going on. It has a history panel, just like most of the Adobe applications. So you can always go backwards in history. You can clear your history. Just remember, history takes up space in the computer. So if you have a gazillion things going on in your history and you allow the computer to store a gazillion things in your history, it has to remember all of those, and that slows down your machine and uses up RAM. So it's not a good idea to just keep doing it, all right? Right now I have my effects rack up. You may have yours set for media browser. Okay, go ahead and activate your effects rack. If you're having trouble finding it, you can find it under Window. Okay, effects rack. Okay, so the effects rack is a source system that we have, and it's effects. It's exactly what it says, and it has voice manipulators, and it's where some sound effects can sit. If you want reverb and echo, if you want different things going on, that's kind of where you find it. And if you look, these are the presets that are built in. There's quite a few. I think there's 50. And depending upon what you want it to do, like, okay, I'm working on a soundtrack for a movie and I want it to sound like they're on the telephone, even though they're not really on the telephone. I can activate that and it will actually go ahead and process it that way. You can just go ahead and sample one if you want. Karaoke. Who would want karaoke? I'll just go with podcast voice, which is probably a good voiceover. And you'll notice all the effects turn on. And if you don't want any of those effects, like you want to turn off the hard limiter or the equalizer, all you do is click on it, okay? You click on it to turn it on and off, just like we do in the appearance panel in Illustrator, okay? You can turn off the different functions, all right? Now, we're going to go ahead and choose a microphone. So on the Mac, it's a preference, so it's generally under the name of the application. In Windows, I think it's under File or Edit. It's in that weird place that Windows decides to put it, wherever that is, okay? And we're going to go down to Audio Hardware. Okay? And this is where we're choosing what it's going to use as far as an input and an output. And right now it's using the system default, which is the Wireless Pro RX. There's different device classes. Don't worry about that so much. That's not something you need to worry too much about. You'll see the sample rates at 4,800, which means it's supported by this particular microphone that I happen to be set at. If you want to, you can buffer the stream more. I don't know why we would in this particular case. I don't know why we would. All right. Anyway, so that's all set up, and that should be good to go. Okay, changes to a number of concurrent. Don't worry about that. All right. So this is our main control panel. It's just like when we're looking at the playhead in video. It's the same thing. It just happens to be audio instead. So as soon as you click record, it's going to start recording the soundtrack. And this input is way too high, so I would probably want to adjust my levels down because there's way too much coming in and it's just a little bit too hot. And when you're done, you just hit the pause or the record button again and it stops recording just like it does with video. And so I made a 17.152 second track. And you're able to see it as a waveform right there. Okay. Now, one thing that you can do, here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete this. And it's that simple, okay? If it's selected, it's just like anything else in Adobe. If it's selected and you hit delete, it's going to go away. If you have multiple things selected, it's going to make them all go away. If you have multiple tracks and you only want one to go away, you only click on the one that you want to go away and hit delete. What's nice about this software is it is non-destructive editing, okay? So the original stays intact. So if you need to manipulate it again later on, you can do that. Okay, so now I'm going to hit recording, start recording again. And what you'll notice is right here, you actually have the ability to, well, come on now. Why aren't you letting me do this? Of course you're not going to let me do this. So I'm going to turn it down over here. And there we go. Now I've lowered it a bit. Great. All right. Now I'm going to hit stop. It's just like any of the other applications. You pull it over. It's the playhead. Okay. Normally, these tracks are so long and so big, the easiest thing to do is just back to start. Yay. And then you can hit play if you want to, just to hear what it sounds like. Oh, wrong button. There we go. And I don't know what effect you might have chose, but you'll notice the effect icons are the same as they are with any other application. So I'm going to hit stop and bring it back. Okay, these are called shadow boxes, all right? These adjust the fade in and fade out. They're also in the other software, Premiere, in the audio tracks, okay? So if you want things to slowly fade in as far as sound and such. And so all you do is kind of grab them, and you'll see that it's starting to move. And what you'll see is, if you look at that waveform, you'll see that it's actually affecting the waveform by dimming it out, okay? That's the only real visual clue that you get that it's doing something. And here's the fade in. And you can adjust how the fade in works simply by adjusting. It's kind of like a Bezier curve in the way you can control it. And as soon as you let it go, they pop right into where they're supposed to be in the first place. Okay? Okie dokie. Now, there are some really funky, interesting things that you can do in here. This is called the spectral analyzer. And so you have the waveform, and then you have this, and you can either have it on or off. This is what allows you to figure out if there's some weird sound going on in the background. It will show up in here. It's kind of a magic thing. And I don't deal with it enough to dive into it for you folks, but you can actually have selection tools and stuff where you can actually grab hold of something and just listen to that particular section of the spectrum and see what's going on as far as background sound. But this is also how the AI and the software, if you tell it to do background noise reduction, this is where it's going to do that. What it's going to, or you can also extract voices. It's going into here and deciding, okay, these peaks are the voice, and then I'm going to shut down this weird stuff that shows up that I don't want and pull that back out and ignore it. Kind of interesting. Okay. Now, if you click on multi-track, okay? Multi-track, okay, the software does support multiple microphones recording simultaneously. It's not great at it. It does not have MIDI support, okay? Audition does not have MIDI support, which is unfortunate. But you can have multiple feeds if you have the ability to have multiple feeds. The reason why when I clicked multi-track it popped this open is because it wants more than one track. So if I tell it OK, this is what it will look like. Okay? And so you can, it's a multi-track, okay? So each of these different colored channels, you can have a different microphone feeding. You can drag in different sounds, like maybe you want to keep your sound effects on your purple channel. And so that's where you drop all of your sound effects or background noises that you want to have control over. But basically, it's just a mixing board for the software. And yeah. So multi-track and waveform are the main ways of looking at it. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my spectral. So once I do a recording in here, how do I get it out? Okay. Well, it's just like any other Adobe software. Okay. You have it selected. Okay. And then you come up here to File. Okay. And in File, you have Export. Okay. You have Save As and Save, which are all the normal settings. If you do a save, it's going to save it as an Audition file rather than being in a particular WAV format. We can dive into the different sound formats if we want to, but it's crazy the amount of sound formats. It'd be great if the sound formats were as small a selection as picture formats, but that's just not the way it works. Probably because there's more than just Windows and Apple deciding what the formats are going to be, because you have all this other software going on. For a long time, even up until like 2005, they were still using Commodore 64s as the main computer driving audio recording. Kind of weird, but there it is. All right. So I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to go to Export. And I want to do it as a file so that I can use it on something else. I'm not burning it to a CD. Effects in the rack will be applied to the exported file. Oops, shoot. I did not mean to hit cancel. I wasn't paying attention. Okay, so there's the Save As window. I was in Export before, wasn't I? File. Okay. Okay. All the different file formats. Okay, so there's some main ones that people use. And those, of course, are going to be listed in here. Okay. Here we go. Okay. These are the standard audio formats. All right. And it's a lot like video formats. There's lossy compression, meaning it throws away information as it records and compresses. And there is non-lossy compression, which in the Mac world, it would be like an SVG, or the Adobe world, an SVG, scalable vector graphic, a PDF, a TIFF. Those would be lossless compression, as opposed to a JPEG, which is lossy compression. And it's kind of the same thing with the file formats. Generally, for compatibility, a WAV or an MP3 are kind of the place that we go, depending upon how we want to save it. Anyway, that's how you can export it and take it and use it. I will have a video on using, we don't have time for it, but on using this simultaneously with Premiere, because they're designed to work at the same time, moving back and forth, and it's a lot like it is with, say, InDesign, where you make changes here and the changes occur inside Premiere, and you get to see how that looks, and you can keep flipping back and forth. Like flipping back and forth between Photoshop and InDesign. They can work really closely together. All right, so if we go to Export, oh, I was in Export, Save As. You'll see it's the same. Yay, cancel. Let's see if Save Selection As gives me some different options. Not really. Same options. All right. I want to be sure I don't forget anything. Multi-track, exporting, in editor. We talked about the effects rack. All right. So it's not hard, okay? It's certainly a lot easier than Premiere as far as how it works, okay? Because you're not dealing with sound and video, you're just dealing with sound, which is kind of nice. So I'm going to go ahead and quit out of Audition. And I'm not going to save anything. Now, I'm going to show you this. This is not on your computers, just so you can see the difference between these different applications. You saw how that one looked. Now I'm going to launch Audacity. It's a very fun play on words. This is how simple this software looks. Okay? It's very straightforward, and it does have MIDI support, which is nice, but it does have a few weaknesses. I don't use it, so I actually had to write down some of its weaknesses. It is destructive editing. It's free. It looks simpler, and it has MIDI support. Those are the things to know about it. And so when you leave here and you don't want to play for your Adobe Cloud account, it's not a bad option. They make it for Linux, Windows, and for Mac. They do not make a Chrome version or a Google version, unfortunately. So it kind of does the same thing where it's actually just recording, blah, blah, blah. You'll notice there's a little bit of a delay. And we can come up here to File, Save Project As, Export Audio. You know, it's nice. It's got nice pictures and stuff. So it makes it a little bit simpler to work with. Okay. So for all of you who are here, go ahead and GarageBand isn't going to be in your launcher, but if you go to your the hard drive and into Applications, you should be able to find GarageBand. And this is what it looks like. I find this to be a relatively simple thing to use as far as software is concerned. I wish Windows had an equivalent, really. And of course, it's very visual, like most Mac stuff. But basically, it's kind of the same thing, except it's always a multi-channel mixer. It doesn't switch back and forth because it doesn't really need to. And all you do is simply click on the layer, kind of like dealing with video, and go ahead and feed it audio. All right. They do have an iPad version of this, and you can record from multiple iPads and phones simultaneously and feed this into one, which is kind of cool. It functions just like any of the other software. You click on the file, you delete it, and it goes away. You want to record it, you hit the red button, and it starts recording. Da, 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 da. It's recording, it's recording. Stop. Okay, and it keeps going. That's just kind of the way it is, all right? And it treats this thing just like any other selection, okay? Like I can come down to this one. I don't know if it's going to let me record a different one. Now I'm recording in a different setting from where the head happened to be last time. I'm going to stop it, go back to the beginning. I can drag these just like I can with video. I can select both of these at the same time, okay, and export them together, and it will automatically merge them into one. As far as determining what you happen to be using, that's these record settings down here. Depending upon what microphone you happen to have. Right now it says it's my MacBook Pro microphone. So I don't know why it's doing that. Probably because I haven't told it that I have the other microphone handy quite yet. So I'm going to go up to settings like normal for stuff. And I'm going to go to audio MIDI. Okay, input device. I can switch it to the microphone that I happen to be using. And so now it will record it from there instead. Okay. Another interesting thing that I find with this software that is a much bigger hunt when you're using Audition is it has tuning to notes. Okay, if you want to adjust the overall tone, you can do that. And it also has a metronome that isn't going to record on the track unless you happen to be listening to it on the computer simultaneously. So you can actually have the rhythm going on the computer without it actually showing up on the audio track, which is kind of cool. Just kind of an interesting function. All right. This one also has a settings. It has normal, the same kinds of effects depending upon how you want it to deal with things. Generally, when I'm doing voiceovers, I'll use narration or natural. And one of the reasons I prefer to use these applications for audio recording instead of just doing it in Premiere or in iMovie is because you have more control, okay? You have more control, you can filter out things which you really can't do when you're inside of Premiere. So there's certain advantages to that, okay? Depending upon what you're trying to do. And it's got telephone, blah, blah, blah. And you'll see that it's got other options underneath all of these if you want to flip through. And you can also manually adjust those, okay? If you want to play with the EQ at all, and up the middle, and all kinds of interesting things like that. And so when you're done with it, okay, this is another nice thing. Non-destructive, because if I bring this back over, it's still there. Kind of cool, okay? Saving the audio files and exporting the audio files. All right, save as. Okay, so save as means it's going to be a band file, okay, which is exactly what we're used to seeing, okay? What's really interesting about the Apple software is they don't, well, when we're dealing with iMovie and this software is that they don't put it under file like we're used to seeing. Okay, so if you want to save it or export it as something different, what you'll find in both iMovie and this application is that it is under the share option. Okay, whether you want to airdrop it into another computer, whether you want to airdrop it into your phone. If you want to mail it, it's going to do the same thing as export to disk, except that it's going to launch an email application at the same time and drop it onto that email. Along with the other stuff. So export song to disk, and you think, oh, I'm going to record it to a CD. No, that's not necessarily the way it works. And these are the standard formats that it saves in, the WAV, AAC, and MP3. Apple's, as a whole, really kind of like MP3s. And right now it's set to high quality. And it would just save it as whatever. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah, it's really straightforward. It's not rocket science, at least not yet. Depending upon how good a quality you want. Okay, a lot of us, when we used to record things to our iPods and stuff, we would end up having to really lower the quality to save space. Because of course, the higher quality takes up a lot more space when you're saving it, okay? Okay, so uncompressed file formats. WAV, although WAVs can be compressed. I'm looking at the other file formats here while we're dealing with that. AAC is lossy compression. MP3 is lossy compression. WAV, I have a thing here that says, okay, that's uncompressed. And then WMA, which is a Windows Media Audio, is a lossless compression file format. But they also have a WMA, Windows Media File, which is lossy and lossless. So you can decide which one you're going to actually use, kind of like a TIFF when you're dealing with video stuff. Okay, there you go. There's the long and the short of it. It's pretty straightforward. Just be sure you have the correct microphone selected, and it kind of tends to know that. Anyway, I'm not going to save. Another day we will talk about iMovie, just because it's really handy for really quickly making videos. Premiere's a standard application, but if you can't afford Adobe anymore, iMovie is a really handy little thing if you happen to have a Mac, and it comes with all Macs, so that's kind of nice. It even lets you burn DVDs, which is kind of cool. All right. So that is it for Audition, Audacity, GarageBand. Like I said, Premiere has an iOS version. Oh, and so does Audition, and so does GarageBand. All of those have iOS support. Okay. Now, one-on-one, what I'd like to do is just see where you're at, since we only have like 17 minutes left. So I am going to stop recording.